Okay, dear David, thank you very much for making time again.
Thank you, Bernd.
4 months ago we met for the first interview.
It seems like just last week.
Well, did you got better in the meantime? Did you improve?
I hope so. I'm always hoping to improve, but when you've been at it for as long as me, I don't think your expectations become a little less.
Yeah. Well, can you tell me how and why the piano became your favorite instrument in your life?
Okay. Well, as a kid, my father played piano, and he got me started, but he actually wanted me to play bass because then I would play bass and I would accompany him. And so somewhere along the line, he made it sound like the piano was the important instrument and the bass was the accompanying instrument. So I kind of figured, no, I don't want to play bass. I want to play piano. That's the really good instrument. Because I am a piano player, that has shaped my sort of musical life and my musical view. Piano players are really often interested in harmony. That's because that's kind of our bag. So. That's kind of what got me into it, and then, it just becomes the means of expression, the way you express yourself. So, that's, I guess, all I can really say. My father really was the person who got me into it, and he was an amateur pianist, and so that's why.
Yeah. And did you had during the first years also kind of a different mentor, maybe?
Oh yeah, a lot. Over the years I've had a bunch of them. When I was a kid I had a number, actually I studied with classical teachers and I never much liked it. And I had one teacher when I was 12 who was a jazz pianist. And he also taught classical, and he was the guy who really got me serious for the first time about music. And then later in high school I studied with a local pianist in Cleveland, where I'm from. And he was a guy named Bill Gidney, who was a terrific pianist no one had ever heard of, but he was a great local figure in Cleveland. And then, over the years, different people have been really important. Kenny Warner was very important for me. And also, a lot of people that you meet, like I wasn't actually so close to Mulger Miller, but he had a kind of influence on me as well, as so many piano players that I listened to, from Kenny Bernd to Kenny Kirkland and all these different players, so I also, one of my oldest friends is a piano player named Bruce Barth, and he was somebody, we went to college in Michigan together, and so we learned a lot from each other, and that was a great experience. So, there's been a lot of figures in my life, I guess starting with my dad, so I have a lot of father figures on piano, but there's so many people that influence us, from people like Herbie Hancock and, all these great players that you study to, friends and peers. And actually, right now I'm doing something kind of interesting. I started playing at a club in Brooklyn. It's not really a club, it's actually a gallery space. It's this place called the Soapbox Gallery. And they have a beautiful 7-foot grand piano there, Yamaha, very nice piano. And it's a gallery space that has a beautiful sound in it. And I started doing a few solo concerts there. I was thinking about preparing for a solo record I'm getting ready to do. Anyway, I invited some pianists to play. We were calling them piano hangs because they've had this. Some other people have had these in the past. And basically, I invite 5 New York pianists to play for each other, each about 20-25 minutes. And that's the afternoon. And it's open to the public. So I started doing it, and I was doing it once a month, and people liked it, and so now I'm doing it twice a month. And the list of pianists who played this thing in the past, it includes many, many great players, from Bruce Barth, Luis Perdomo, just many great jazz pianists. And we're adding to it all the time. There have already been about 45 different pianists who played there. And so it's every Saturday. And I'm actually not very much in New York this summer, but I'm still organizing them. So when you talk about different piano players who are kind of peers and role models and friends, this has been a very nice thing for the jazz community. It's something that we're actually doing for the piano community, that, I've really tried to have different genders, men and women, and ethnic groups, and like just everybody from young players to old players like me. So yeah, so it's been nice. When you think about piano players, that's what comes to mind right now.
What did made you to organize these hangs, these piano hangs?
Well, like I said, the first time I did it, I was playing solo there, and the person who owns the place was interested in trying to do something. I said, we used to have occasionally these sort of group get-togethers for pianists. It's a little bit like a recital where you play for each other, and you don't think of that happening so much on the professional level, and so. So I just thought there was a pianist named actually Mike Kanan, a great piano player in New York, and he had a place that he used to invite people to. So that's been a historic thing. It actually goes back a long time. I remember Billy Taylor talking about playing in a after-hours place with Willie the Lion Smith and Art Tatum and people like that. So we're not pretending to be quite that level of fame of players, but there have been a lot of great musicians to do it, so it's a nice thing, and I hope it continues. We're almost a half a year in, so
okay.
Yeah,
sounds very beautiful.
Yeah, it's nice. If you're in New York, please stop by. Every other Saturday, 3 to 6.
$10.
Yeah, $10. Right, exactly. You saw the post.
Yeah. Well, as a pianist, you also play at least sometimes the organ and the Fender Rhodes piano, right?
Yes. Well, very little organ these days.
Yeah.
But Fender Rhodes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Please explain me what you like about the Fender Rhodes piano. And is it difficult to play this instrument? What you love about its sound? Is the sound maybe magical for you? Just explain me how you and when and why you choose the electric piano.
Well, I think some of that comes out of the period that I grew up or came of age in. When I first started playing in when I was in high school in the 70s, this was the instrument that was available. Actually, the first one I ever had was a clavinet. That was the first electric piano I had, and then after that, a Fender Rhodes. That was the one I was the closest to, and I played it on and off, even in New York. In Cleveland, I played it all the time, and it was actually in Cleveland there was a technician who was one of the people who actually wrote the manual with Bob Rhodes. I think it's Bob. Anyway, so there was a guy who was really great at working with them. The thing about Fender Rhodes is they're kind of temperamental, and they get slammed around because they weigh 1,000,000 pounds. So you're just dragging it, and and then it gets sort of knocked out of tune and all that kind of stuff. But it was the sound really of an era. There are a lot of records that Miles Smiles and CTI records, and there are a lot of famous records that were made with the Fender Rhodes, Stevie Wonder's music, a lot of that. So it's a sound that has a real ambience or vibe to it, in a way that certain digital pianos, nobody really wants to play a digital piano that much. The Fender Rhodes has a certain intrinsic quality that makes it, a certain kind of instrument, a valid or meaningful instrument to play. So if you think of Bitches Brew and all these records that were made with it, it was the sound of a kind of an era. When I moved to New York, I played in a club called Augie's, which was the place you played for almost nothing. They passed the hat. It was this kind of joint. But we'd play till 4 a.m, and everybody knew about it, and people came to it. So Josh Redman would come and sit in, or Fred Hirsch, or Scott Colley, or any number of players would come. And actually, Don Braden, who you've interviewed, we used to play there a lot. So it was kind of a upcoming player's spot. And they didn't have a piano, so I used to drag my Fender Rhodes to this gig, and after a while, I used to I cut a hole in the case of the Fender Rhodes, and I got a big chain, and I chained it to a pole in the back of the place. And when I wasn't there, I would just leave it there, because you don't want to carry that if you don't have to. So at that time, I played it probably more than I played acoustic piano. That's sort of happily, I guess. That's not really the case anymore. I don't play it that often. And I still have one, but I don't take it out. It's just too much work. But too heavy. But I do often play electric pianos that are going for that same sound, since the digital piano often feels kind of artificial to me in the way a Fender Rhodes sound doesn't. It's an authentic electric sound. So I have a kind of little, it's actually a little keyboard that I sort of MIDI to a big keyboard, and that has a very authentic Fender Rhodes sound. So I've even used it on recordings, so yeah.
Okay. Well, did you ever experience in your life as a musician the idea or the will to create different sounds, maybe different compositions ways, just to express other possibilities or new possibilities than the normal piano or the normal composition way gives to you?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I have to say, I was probably a little more interested in that at a different point in my life. There was one period where I was playing, actually, another guy I think you probably interviewed, Matt Wilson. So I used to have a band with Matt Wilson and Billy Drews. We were a trio. And we played at kind of gallery spaces. We did a few different kind of like very beautiful rooms. I remember we were at this one Japanese gallery that was great. And then I used to play, I had bells that I played. I did things inside the piano with like pennies in the strings and all this kind of prepared piano stuff. And then I also used to play toy piano in that band. So those are nice sounds, and I hope, actually I would love to get back to it. That was a beautiful thing. It actually gives me an idea. Maybe on my solo record I'll play some toy piano. It's a beautiful instrument to add to it. It's very celeste-like, you know. It's funny, I was just in a store and I saw a toy piano now, and I went to play and it was electric. I was like, wow, they even have a digital toy piano now. That was a little discouraging somehow. But anyway, you know, I think those are nice sounds to bring to things. I was always attracted to, you know, I was very influenced by Keith Jarrett in that period, and he plays a lot of percussion and wood flutes and things like that, and I always kind of liked that side of the acoustic piano sound. So while that's not my main focus, I do enjoy it when it comes up.
When it comes up,
yeah,
sometimes.
When it comes up. I'll often, you know, sort of reach into the piano to do something. It's funny because there are people who are almost exclusively inside the piano. I just heard somebody at one of these jazz piano hangs, Chris Davis, who's a great pianist. She had a kind of electronic device that you put on the string, and it just kind of, you know, like depending on where you are on the string, because it's harmonics, you know. So it was like called the electric bow or something. It makes it sound almost like a violin. So that was an interesting thing. So who knows? Maybe I'll get into some of that at some point.
Yeah, and also did you maybe compose or perform electronic music or music for film maybe, or contemporary classical music?
Contemporary classical music I was really interested in. When I went to school, I went to University of Michigan, and they didn't have much of a jazz program, and they do more now. But I was taking a lot of composition classes, and I was really interested in people like, you know, Stockhausen and all that kind of thing. And there was a period where I was having a hard time deciding about that. I thought maybe I was more of a composer than a jazz musician. But in the end, I decided jazz was the way to go. It was more fun. I like contemporary classical music. I haven't listened to it so much recently, but I didn't have as much fun with it, I guess. So I prefer jazz ultimately, I think, for me.
Okay. Well, when you perform live, when you have a concert, do you always hear your fellow musicians good?
Well, no, just because of the difficulties of life, you know, that we sometimes perform in places that aren't so conducive, you know. It's funny, there's this one place in New York called Fat Cat, which is a pretty intense sounding place. It's just a very loud bar. And it's a nice place. It's nice because it's not so expensive, so a lot of young people go there and play ping pong and pool and make a lot of noise. And it's challenging, you know. On the upside, when you can't hear yourself well, maybe it's because you're playing in a place where they don't have a long jazz tradition, and it's more like a place, you know, a hangout place or something like that. In that sense, it's nice that you're bringing jazz to people who might not otherwise hear it. So whenever I'm in a place where they don't have the greatest piano or they don't have the perfect setting to be heard, I always think, oh, okay, well, so we're bringing music to some place where they don't get to hear it. It's easy to play in a perfect concert hall, like the A's Hall or something with a beautiful 9-foot Steinway grand piano. That's obviously a space that's meant to, present music. But sometimes when you're at a place that's that's more challenging, sort of sonically, it's still a good thing to do. You're bringing music to an environment where they don't usually have it. So yeah, that is a big issue. Very often people don't realize the difference between a great performance and a mediocre performance is how well the players can hear each other, or whether sometimes just whether the sound has a warmth or is pretty to you. Sometimes you're playing and if the piano doesn't sound particularly good, it's very hard. You have to play to your imagination or something, to your memory of what things should sound like, and that's more difficult. But it's still very important to play. Whenever you have a gig, it's important to play your best, or to at least try. So.
Okay. Well, do you also sometimes maybe stop playing during a concert just to enjoy the others more?
Oh, sure. Yeah, without a doubt. I used to always joke that comping is accompanying someone else. I used to say my best comping was strolling. Strolling means layout, don't play. So, so much the music that I grew up with includes music that doesn't have pianos in it. So, Ornette Coleman's band, or, Sonny Rollins playing trio, there's a lot of great sounds. That one band I used to love was a band called Old and New Dreams, which was Ed Blackwell and Charlie Hayden and Don
Cherry.
Thank you. Don Cherry and Dewey Redman. So that was a band I heard a number of times and really liked. No piano, although sometimes Don Cherry would sit down and play the piano. But, or was it Dewey? No, I guess it was Don Cherry. Anyway, okay, so, the point is, if you like the sound of, music without piano, and you're playing a gig somewhere, if you do this, suddenly it's a band without piano in it. And I always like that.
Okay. And how much joy do you experience during a concert? Is it
it's
big joy, or
it depends. I mean,
or maybe not.
We're going for big joy. We're hoping for big joy. I always used to say that, when it's right, when you're playing improvised music and you have a really special experience, it's really an amazing feeling, and it's not like very many others. I think most people who do something for a living don't get to experience, this. I mean, I used to tell my sister that on a really great night where it's really happening and you're surprised and excited and really enjoying playing, it's the best feeling. It's better than sex. It's better than anything. And so I was talking to my sister, who is a therapist, and I was like, do you feel that way about your job? And she says, oh, I like being a therapist, but I don't really think it's better than sex. So I think, for me, that's where most of us are in this music, because somewhere along the line we got hooked on the feeling of when it really comes together. And, I really enjoy getting to present my own writing and all this kind of stuff. We're very fortunate. So yes, there's a lot of joy involved.
Okay. And how important for you is to have an audience around? Does it influence you?
Yeah, it definitely influences, no question. And it is really important. It's important in a funny way, because I don't need thousands and thousands of people, I have played a few times for huge outdoor concerts or something like that, and that's a great feeling. But it can just be a few people, that's fine. I think there has to be somebody there, though. The person who's receiving the music is really important. Otherwise, you're kind of just at your house practicing, and that's a wonderful feeling too, but it's not the same, So I think having venues, like the people who make venues for us to play in and the people who come to them, they're doing a huge service for the music too, because you can't really, I mentioned I'm doing a solo record in a week or two, and it's a kind of, there's a number of days in the studio, and this kind of, I'm going to another city to do it, so it's a little bit of a, hoopla. There's a bunch of stuff going on, and I said, is there some way we can also record a gig? You know, because I'm fine playing solo in the studio, and my last record was just a studio record, nobody was there. But why don't we record a gig? Because sometimes that comes together in a way that playing by yourself doesn't. You know, it's that element, that part, that you know, there's an edginess or like a little bit of a more, I don't want to say nerves exactly, but there's like, it matters more. There's like something at stake somehow when you play in front of people. And I think there's a little bit of energy that you get from them, and that's all positive.
So the audience increased the energy a little bit?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the audience increases the energy, and the audience is, when you play something, if somebody's hearing it, it's different. You know, it's different than just me. The funny thing is, though, very often when I do have an audience, I'm pretty much ignoring the audience, you know, so, because you want to be focused on making the music and not on, you know, I don't do anything really visually or anything. One thing for me is I was doing, at one point I was playing all original music, and sometimes it was kind of hard music, sometimes it was a little bit free or whatever, and I always talk to the audience a lot. I'm a chatty person anyway, as you probably gathered, but I talk to the audience in between tunes, the way some musicians don't. And I do it because I want them to feel like we're both on the same theme. You know, I think they need that breather in between tunes. I have friends who really want to segue tune to tune, and so they'll play an hour and a half without a break. I just feel like that's a lot to ask people to listen to. So I like to, you know, sort of chat them up, and I'm a sort of frustrated comedian, so I will, you know, make my goofy jokes or do whatever. So in that sense, the audience is important too, because it's a communicative experience. It's a communal experience. So I like that part of it.
Yeah. And do you remember something happened maybe during a concert you want to share with audience, something special? Did they shout? Did they throw beer at your head?
Well, you know, I mean, I play a lot in Japan. I've been in Japan a lot this last 6 months. And when I first started playing in Japan, it goes place to place. Like, you know, when you're in Tokyo, you don't have this experience. But particularly in the countryside, there's a lot of little jazz clubs that are like fan clubs. I mean, they use the word jazz club, but it's almost in the fan club sense of the word. Not like jazz club in like these cool places. They're more like even amateur like jazz places. They'll bring in a professional band for one night. And when we play in those places, people would just absolutely be screaming. It was like, you know, you play 2 notes, like, it's like that. And it doesn't stop the entire set, you know. And so it's funny because Gene, the drummer, who you also know, from the very first time, he just loved it. And I liked it, but I also had reservations about the amount. I knew we were just really, you know, they were really egging us on, and we're really playing just tons of, like, it's a little, maybe over too much, or maybe too much already. But it was a lot of fun, and I used to go there every year and play with that same crowd, and so I knew all the people, and they're yelling, David, you know, they're like, you know, so it was, it's a lot of fun, and, you know, I think, yeah, the audience is part of it, you know, it's definitely important, and when people, you know, clap, and when they yell, or whatever, it's a great thing. You have to, because I play a lot of different places, you have to adapt to places where they don't do that. You know, you can't assume, you know, you can't need that. You know, you have to just look internally and make it happen when people aren't quite so effusive. But it is a really nice quality. So, and that's something I really associate, particularly with Japan, and especially in these countryside clubs that we've been playing for years. So.
Okay. Well, can you please explain me your understanding of time in relation to music? What is time? What is timing? Do you feel lost sometimes in time changes, in rhythm changes? Do you enjoy time? Maybe you have also some funny stories to share about time.
Wow, that's such a deep topic. It's like it's so huge. You know, I think in general, for jazz, you know, there's a saying, it doesn't really matter, it's not the notes you play, it's how you play them. And, you know, of the 2 elements, people that have great time and maybe are less selective about the notes, and people who have terrible time and are really careful and play great notes, the ones who have good time are going to be fine. The ones that, so it's, jazz is such a rhythmic, kind of world. And it's become only more so as it's, sort of taken in more and more cultures and world music. And, I just was in January, I was in Bulgaria, and I was playing with some former students from here, actually Bulgaria and Greece. And I did a record with these guys, and so they sent me their music. It's really easy. There's not much to it. And then I get it, of course, and it's just like every other bar is a different meter, and that's like that's so natural to them. That's part of their background. And it wasn't hard in the sense that it could have been a lot harder, but it was something I definitely had to look at and spend some time with. And so one thing that's interesting is in the last 30 years, jazz has become much more complex in terms of rhythm, mixed meter, all these different kinds of, it kind of starts in jazz with, you can go back to examples earlier, people like Don Ellis and David Berkman and people like that. But really, since the fusion era and after, there's been all this kind of much more, odd meters, mixed meters, over the bar kind of rhythm. In fact, I think to the exclusion of some other elements sometimes. Like I think maybe jazz up until the 60s, late 60s, was really driven more by harmonic innovation than rhythmic innovation, I would say. Although there always was rhythmic innovation happening. But particularly recently, you get more and more of this complexity, Indian rhythms, all this kind of stuff. So that's been really interesting in the sense that I just turned 60 this year. So one of the things that I've experienced over the years is you don't do hard things, or in my case, you don't seek out hard things necessarily, but you do it as it becomes part of the vocabulary of the music. So I can remember being on a gig where someone called something in 5/4 and being a little shocked. Now of course I call things like that myself, and more complicated things. So it's part of the evolution of the music, and it's in my case I don't feel like it's a choice. I wouldn't say I'm a specialist of that kind of thing, but as you figure out what your community is, you have to do the things that community sort of envisions, and that's always kind of challenging. So I play with Gene sometimes I've played his trio occasionally, or other bands that he's led, and those bands always have a lot of odd meter things in them. Also, I played with him in a band called New York Standards Quartet for the last 14 years, and that's when he brings something in, it can be sort of complex in that way. Beyond that, though, jazz ultimately for me, the reason why I'm a jazz musician and not a classical musician is because there is something in this music that really appealed to me. Some people do both, and they are equally conversant in both almost. But most people choose, and in my case, I wasn't a classical prodigy of any sort. I got into jazz, and the thing that attracted me was how it felt, So I'm still interested in jazz that swings or has a groove, or, that's still a defining quality. And it's also one of the ways that we interact. So even if you're playing in 4/4 or some meter that's not so complex, you're still like, sort of sending an accent towards the drummer, or the sax player plays some kind of cycle or something, or some kind of phrase that's offbeat, So we communicate, I think, even more than through melody and harmony, through rhythm, So rhythm is really the kind of conversation, maybe the first level of conversation in a jazz group. Of course, there's harmonic choices and melodic choices as well. I don't want to minimize them, but yeah, rhythm is very central, and it's something that it's sort of how you shake hands with other musicians, is by feeling the time the way they feel it. So that's very important, and I actually think young players often have they have a very complex sense of the rhythmic frame, like metric things and all that, but they don't quite have the same set of values about hooking up and swinging that my generation sort of has. So I sort of feel like, and that's something we can kind of negotiate together, you know. So it's an interesting quality. I do think that generations have a certain groove. Like the beboppers from the 40s sort of felt time a certain way, and Branford Marsalis and his bands in the 80s and 90s, they felt, Jeff Watts, they felt time a certain way. You know, Kenny Kirkland is a certain kind of thing, whereas Wynton Kelly and Joe, you know, that band is a certain kind of thing. So a drummer I used to play with said every 10 years or so, the time has its own kind of feeling. So I think, you know, finding people that are in your time group and sort of grooving along is a tradition that happens in jazz as well.
Well, we are really surrounded by a lot of music, and it's really increasing, I have the idea.
Yeah.
I think 20 years ago a concert was very something special, and now we have concerts all the time. What do you think is music? Is it a language? Is it a connector? And why do people love music so much?
Yeah. Wow, boy, your guess is as good as mine. You know, for me, it's become, you know, that's an interesting question. It's such a broad question. I have to say, most of the time I'm focused on music, it's a more narrow perspective. You know, it's like what chord should go in bar 5, you know, that kind of thing. So I don't always think of it in those terms. I don't know what it feels like to be a consumer of music and not be a musician, you know. So I always kind of hope, like sometimes people will say that something I did had an influence on them in some kind of way, you know, and something I played or some gig I did, meant something to them, and I always think that's great. I kind of hope that that's true, you know. I sort of hope that music has some broader importance. When on my bad days, when I'm not sure that that's the case, and I'm living in a politically horrifying, you know, universe in the United States, I sort of think, well, what does this matter? And you know, but I kind of think, at the worst, it's a very benign, not evil thing to spend your time doing. So at the worst, you know, being a musician and making music is a pretty gentle, you know, safe thing to do that doesn't hurt people a lot. When I make a mistake, nobody dies. It's not like being a heart surgeon. So it has that going for it. But I also think I don't entirely know how people receive it. I hope they receive it well, but I'm not really an egotist about it, you know, so it's gratifying to do, and I just hope that, you know, on the other side, on the receiving end, that it has some kind of meaning for people. I'm not a real believer in a lot of things. I'm not so much of somebody who has a clear sense of how that stuff gets organized. So I am a little bit skeptical or whatever, atheistic or something like that. So I just kind of find my path and pursue it and hope that the result is positive, because I'm not, I don't always see that connection so clearly.
Okay, good. I have another question about jazz. You mentioned it already, it changes a lot, but also what is changing is that we have a lot of music schools, academies, so jazz is also becoming kind of academic.
Sure.
What do you think? Is this positive, or do we also somehow miss the connection to the normal people in jazz, what we had maybe 50 years ago more?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I think that things evolve. That's a little bit like asking a question about technology. Is technology a good thing or a bad thing? Is having screens all the time a good thing or a bad thing? And I think we can see the obvious bad things about that. We can also see the obvious benefits. You know, there's an awful lot of information at your fingertips. Somebody could interview me if I come over here, and we can have an interesting conversation, and then you can publish it, and somebody can look at that and hopefully get some benefit from that. You know, it's like technology is like planes. I mean, sometimes I get a little frustrated with travel, and the other day I had just a really crummy travel experience. I came from Japan I had a 5-hour layover in Moscow, and then I came here, I got to Schiphol at like 10:30 at night, and I had made a reservation at a yotel, which turned out was a transit hotel that I could not get to because I didn't have a boarding pass any longer. Anyway, I'm there at like 11 o'clock at security trying to get in. Anyway, I don't have to go into the details more. It was really stupid and it was really a drag. But you sort of get frustrated with this kind of level of like travel, and it's not very pleasant, and the security and the overstuffed planes, and many things that make it kind of difficult. Anyway, whenever I'm in that situation, I just think about, well, basically I'm all over the world all the time, especially back and forth between Japan and New York, but also New Zealand and Bulgaria and all these other places. And that would have been pretty much impossible about 100 years ago. So that technology I'm pretty happy with, because it allows me to play in all these places and meet all these people. So, when you say the question was about music changing and about academia, academia in many ways really helped jazz. I mean, it gave people jobs, at a time when venues and recording there are less venues than there used to be, at least in New York and in a lot of places. And recording used to pay musicians a lot. And recording has really changed with all the, Spotify and streaming and all these other things. So, in that sense, academia has been really good by giving, musicians work. I feel like, again, that's another thing that I feel like when I'm teaching, I'm just trying to help people figure out how to practice and get better. So that's basically a positive thing to do. Yes, there are negatives in that people used to come up more on the bandstand, and a lot of things that have become somewhat more set, like what chord scale to use and all that, I think those were more being negotiated and people were sort of discovering it on their own. There was probably a wider divergence of styles. Somebody like Thelonious Monk doesn't come through a jazz program so easily, I don't think. But it's the way, it's sort of the way it is. I also think there's a little bit of tendency when you get older to think the way that it was when you were coming up is really better, and again, I'm not saying that I disagree or agree with that, but I think that's a natural tendency that we have. So I'm a little bit skeptical when people say that jazz has gotten too academic and it's lost its connection to people. Yeah, that sounds a little bit like something that people my age would say. So I do have certain feelings about some of the directions in jazz, and look, I can't support all of it. Like I have students who play things that I'm not so fond of sometimes, but that's what they're supposed to do. If all the students I have, or all the students that I've been involved with, if every one of them played music that a 60-year-old person loved, something's probably wrong. So I think they have to kind of go off and do their thing and pursue different directions in order just to figure out what comes next for music, for jazz.
Does there exist a music for musicians?
I know people say that. People will say that person is like a musician's musician and maybe has less of a kind of broad appeal in some way. I don't know. I think a lot of times the people that become popular in jazz are the people that rise, that seem to get a lot of attention. For example, I play with Linda O some, and she was on not my most recent recording, but the one before. She's an incredible musician. I mean, she plays a kind of music that I really appreciate and sometimes really like. She's an incredible sideband and wonderful to play with. But she came and did a clinic at Queens, and she's just a really gifted person. I mean, she's singing all the parts, and she has perfect pitch, and she's, like playing one rhythm on her body and dancing another rhythm. I mean, it was sincere. It was the real deal. I mean, she wasn't, and she's somebody who's been getting a lot of attention lately. She's on the cover of Jazz Times or whatever. It's kind of deserved, I mean, it's like Jacob Collier got a lot of attention. He's pretty happening. I mean, that guy he knows a lot of music. So I'd say more often than not, a lot of the people it's not universal. There are people who get some attention and other people who never get like some musician who should be getting all this attention who doesn't. I tend to feel that way about sometimes overlooked players, like maybe, but I think often people who are getting a lot of attention, Dayna Stevens plays on my last 2 records. He's incredibly busy these days. He's very much a musician du jour. You know, he's very like a trendy, popular person right now. He's great. He deserves it. You know, so I tend to think that, you know, the musicians are maybe the people who are out there doing it for a long period of time, but I do think that a lot of the people who are getting attention are getting it because they're really good, you know, so I think there's both, but I really am, that's one of the things that keeps me in New York, that as these, you know, new players come up who are getting a lot of attention, that I have a relationship to that, and yeah, it didn't exactly answer your question, but sort of danced around it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it brings me to your new album. It's called 6 of 1, with 10 songs inside. And you play together with Dayna Stevens on tenor and Avi, Adam Corker on bass clarinet and soprano saxophone, Billy Joris at alto saxophone and clarinet, Chris Lightcap on bass, Kenneth Salters on drums, and 2 guests, Tim Amakost on tenor and Rogerio Boccato on percussion. Mm-hmm. Please explain your choice of these musicians.
Okay,
first.
Sure. So this is a sextet that I've been developing over the last 5 years. The last record I did, Old Friends and New Friends, was also a sextet. This is the rhythm section of Chris Lightcap and Kenneth Salters. Kenneth is a younger player. He's in his 30s. Chris is somebody that I've been playing with on and off, mostly off. There was a long period where we didn't play together, but he is somebody that I've played with in New York for a lot of years, going back to the 90s. He most recently plays with. He does a lot of different things. He has a kind of freeish side. Plays with people like Craig Taborn and Gerald Cleaver, and also Nels Klein. Of Wilco, I guess. I barely know who this person is, but I understand he's quite famous. So he does like a lot of different things. So Regina Carter, he's in her band. Kenneth is a great young player who's really starting to get a lot of attention around New York, and he brings kind of a slightly different feeling, I think. But Adam and Billy and Dayna was the sextet from the last record, and one thing that's been nice was over the last 5 years we had a lot of gigs, and we developed a kind of repertoire, and we developed also a way of playing together. One thing I really like to do with the sextet is not write backgrounds, but have them improvise backgrounds, and so I'm always trying to find a middle ground where there's more improvisation. I tend not to like large group writing so much. I mean, that's just kind of silly thing to say. Obviously, Ellington and there's a lot of great large group writing. What I meant to say is, in my own writing, I don't really want to write backgrounds. I like to have the ensemble kind of evolve and improvise. So the fact that we've kept that same group together for a long time has really allowed it to develop. Also, I wrote music sort of specifically for them, which people always say they do, but I really did in this case. One of the tunes is called Billy, and it's based on a kind of song that Billy wrote. So that's sort of evolved into a real band over the last number of years. Tim is somebody I play with in the New York Standards Quartet. I play with him with Gene Jackson. He's a great player and a great friend. And actually, as Dayna got busier, Tim started doing a lot of the gigs with us. And when it came time to record, there were certain tunes that he had really put his stamp on, like they felt like his personality. So that's the thing that I'm happiest with this recording, is the way the various people all have their individual personalities very well represented. It feels like truly you're listening to those particular players, and they play beautifully on this recording, and I was really happy with that. Adding Rogerio, Rogerio is another old friend of mine, and I know you've talked to him as well. I was always looking for a project to do something with him. In fact, when I was recording for Palmetta years and years ago, I would always want to bring Rogerio and I'd be like, yeah, it's hard in that studio to add the extra person. It's kind of doesn't fit. Anyway, so actually Rogerio overdubbed things in this case, but we ended up kind of manipulating things a little bit, and then we bring the drums out and bring the percussion up, and I was very happy with how it turned out in the end. A recording is different from a performance, so you can tweak it, you can make changes, and I did more of that on this recording than I normally do. So that was very satisfying to have that. So I tend to be pretty critical, pretty self-critical, but I'm pretty pleased with this recording, so I hope people like it.
And why is it called 6 of 1?
I really struggled to figure out a name for this. One of the things that happens is as you go, I have 10 records out as a leader, and the first one I really had an idea in mind. It was called Handmade. And I was like, music is handmade, and I also wanted to emphasize the imperfections that make it beautiful, like, the cup that you have where the potter makes the glaze crack, and then that, it's like using accidents and just like the humanity of music. That was the idea behind Handmade. But over the years, like from the next record, you're like, well, what's the next one going to be called? I don't have any new ideas that I really want to express. So I had the idea that I was really working on for a long time with this one was Scrambled Intersection, because in Japan, they have these intersections where there's like 8 different lines of traffic, and when the light turns, all the people flood the street, and that's called a Scrambled Intersection, or kosaten in Japanese. And so I was working with that idea for a while, and I just couldn't figure out anything. And I asked a friend of mine, and I was like, yeah, I'm trying to think of a name. She said, 6 of 1, which is an English expression, which means 6 of 1, half of a dozen of the other. It's usually just mean 2 things that are kind of the same. But in this case, 6 of 1 is sort of describing the sextet, merging into one thing. And that was kind of the idea there.
Okay. Well, you recorded again for Palmetta Records. You did it already several times. Can you tell me about your relationship with Palmetta? Why do you love it to work with them and to record there? How is the atmosphere in the studio?
Yeah.
And how was that, the process there?
Well, what's interesting is, I sometimes tell students this because, the recording situation has changed so much over the years. I got with Palmetta in 1996, and they recorded everything. It was actually a real one-man sort of labor of love. The label was a guy named Matt Ballard-Saris. He was the producer. And he recorded my first record as a leader. That was one I just mentioned, Handmade, with Tom Harrell, Steve Wilson, and Brian Blade, and Ugano Kegwo. And then, because back then you had a real relationship with a label, they would record you every couple of years, So I did one in 96, I did one I guess the one in 96 came out in 98 or 7. Anyway, I did one a couple of years later, I did one a couple of years after that, and a couple of years. So I did 4 records between then and 2004 or 5. And those were it was a real community, and we were all sort of growing at the same time because the label was growing. As I said, those were my first records. That was Matt Wilson's first record, Ben Allison, Frank Kimbrough, another number of people recorded on that label. Fred Hirsch was with them, Andrew Hill. Anyway, it was such a supportive environment. They had an office in Greenwich Village, and I would go into the city and I would, make calls or call radio stations or send out packages to get gigs and all that kind of stuff. They paid for postage. It was just like, very supportive. They did publicity, they did radio, all that kind of stuff. Those kind of relationships with labels don't really exist anymore. Now you kind of produce a CD, you produce a master and you sell it to somebody. When I did my last record, it was kind of a reuniting of Matt Ballard-Saris, myself, and Brian Blade, because we had done 3 records before, and this was our first in 11 years. So we did that record, and then I went to the new Palmetta, which is not really the same anymore, but it's also nice in its way. All those people that I mentioned, not Andrew Hill, obviously, who's passed on, but Fred Hirsch and Frank Kimbrough and Ben Allison and Matt Wilson are all still with Palmetta. The woman who took over, actually, they are a metal, heavy metal record distribution company called Megaforce. But they maintain Palmetta, this little tiny jazz label, with records that I think don't make anywhere near as much as their heavy metal distribution makes for them. And it's kind of an old idea too, that a label that's making sort of big money in some other way has this little jazz label that they sort of nurture as their little pet, you know. So they do a lot of they do hire a nice promotion, and while they don't do all the things they used to, sadly, nobody does all the things that they used to do in the 90s. So it's a different situation, but I'm very appreciative of Missy Colazzo and those people there who are keeping the flame burning, if not quite as brightly as it used to.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to the album 601. I want to know more about the choice of the songs for putting on the album, and I also want to know a little bit about the choreography of the songs when one appears on the first one as the first one, and the second, and the last one. Because you have 10 songs, right. For sure you had ideas about the situation there.
Yes, I was rearranging it many times up to the last minute. So the songs are what I tried to do, or what happened. I didn't really try. This is what sort of evolved. Was a kind of cross section of different approaches. You know, so the first song is a song called "Blowing Smoke." And it's something I wrote in 5 minutes for a gig at Smoke Jazz Club in New York. And it was, it was something that is pretty straight ahead. It's like, it's the blue note moment on the record. And, it's just swinging and kind of, it feels a little bit to me like a Cedar Walton tune or something. It's pretty straight ahead. The next tune on the record is one called Cynical Episode. And that's a slightly punning title on Cyclical Episode, a song by Sam Rivers. So it's a little bit political commentary. But anyway, that was a song where Dayna plays iwi. That's actually, for me, that's one of the more interesting compositions on there. It's an unusual form. It's an odd meter song. It goes between 5 and 7. And also, Dayna plays iwi on the first solo. And then the iwi is, an electronic, it's like a synthesizer essentially that's activated by your breath. But because it's that, he can play 2 notes at once, and he can also play 7 octaves like a keyboard, So like he plays his solo, and then he goes down into the basement and plays bass for me. So I play a solo over his iwi, basically, although Chris is still also a little bit in the mix. On Dayna's solo, Adam is playing bass on bass clarinet. So we sort of messed around with the process, and that one we actually recorded in pieces. I was so pleased when I heard it, like how it came out in the end. But anyway, the next one is this tune for Billy, which is kind of a more lighthearted sort of, but it's actually a very complex, hard tune to play over. It's a mixed meter tune that has sort of some of the spirit of Billy's writing. And then after that, I actually can't recite the whole record. I guess maybe Blue Poles is next, which is an older tune. That's more of a straight ahead. I mean, straight ahead is the wrong word. It's more of a kind of modern upswing. But the point I guess I want to make with the music is that there's a lot of things that happen over the course of the record. So on one tune, a tune called Stomata, which means downtown in Japanese. That's where my wife and I live when we're in Japan. It's sort of downtown. It's kind of a very old Japanesey kind of place. Downtown actually in Japan doesn't mean what it usually means. Outside of Japan, you think of a built-up sort of center city in downtown. In Japan is kind of old style and very traditional Japanese. So that has like a free solo for the horns where they just kind of overlap each other and they just play this free thing. On another tune called 3.5 Minutes, I play free. So we kind of have everything going on. We have some songs that are more almost folkish, and then some other songs that have, sort of free elements, and then songs like, there's another song in there called Kickstopper. Actually, I've always been sort of against the crowdfunding thing, so there's a crowdfunding thing called Kickstarter, so I wrote a tune called Kickstopper. It's also, we call rhythmic figures in a tune kicks, so it has a lot of those. Anyway, So that's another kind of straight ahead tune. One thing I was happy with this record was the way it sort of goes back and forth between these different kind of areas of interest. So that's it, I guess.
So you organized it like that? And
you were asking about the organization of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really hard for this one. Sometimes you have an idea. My first record, I felt really happy with that, and we spent a lot of time on it. And I used to negotiate with Matt Baltzeris because he had strong ideas. His idea was always that the first 3 tunes ought to give you a kind of an overview of the whole record. So if by the time you've heard the first 3, you should have a sense of the arc of everything that's going to happen. So that was his idea. You know, sometimes the one that comes first. I mean, I think many musicians, and I'm sort of like one of them, have a tendency to put the tune that they like the best first, and then they go down in descending order. So by the time you get to 10, it's a record that, you know, it's a tune that people aren't that attached to. I didn't do that this time. I kept flipping back and forth to try and find some kind of way of telling a story. You know, you always do this thing where I'll often play the ending of one tune, and then you listen to how the next one starts, you know. So I think I'm always really conscious, or trying to be conscious of that. You know, I just did a record with New York Standards Quartet, and it's actually the first time I was ever on an actual record. It's vinyl, you know, and that's really great because you have like side 1, the first track of side 1, the last track of side 1, the first track of the B side, the last tune. There's a lot more programming. In CDs, it's just next, and especially these days, you know, with everything being streamed, then it's just not even that. It's like it just exists in the ether. So, but I try and make it so that it feels like a suite of music. That's certainly the goal.
Okay. I have a question. It's about the first moment when you start touching the piano. How is that for you? Is it special, or are you doing it just like that?
No, I think that is special, and I think, you know, a lot depends on what the piano feels like and what the room sounds like. You know, obviously there's, you know, more practical concerns like, is it in tune? You know, so if you touch it and it feels, and it's really out of tune or something, that's a little bit of a bummer. But I just did a solo tour in February, I guess, in Japan. And I did about 6 solo gigs, and that's really a big deal. Like that, it is true, the moment when you first touch it, but also the variation in rooms and room sounds and pianos and piano sounds. I did one gig in a temple. It was like all tatami, those kind of Japanese mats in a temple. And that was beautiful. And then I did another one. One of the best ones was probably in this like piano teacher's studio. It just somehow, that piano in that room and that sound really is very special. I always wanted to have a phenomenal piano in my house, and I don't. I have a nice Mason Hamlin piano. It's got a few little problems with it, but I've never had like an incredible $80,000 Steinway in my house. And I always wanted it because I thought, oh, it'd be great to record there, you know, to be able to record a duo record, to make a duo record or make a solo record in your own house on the piano you always play. Because that's the experience piano players don't get. We don't get to have, most of us, I think Herbie does, and I think Keith Jarrett does, but most of us don't get to have a piano that we travel with. So it's always like this adjustment where you play something and you have to react to what's there. But since I don't have that anyway, I don't have that piano in my house, I actually think it's kind of a good thing, because going out and playing somewhere else where you don't usually play and listening to the way it sounds in the room when you first play it, that's a part of the thing that generates ideas, and that's part of the thing that makes it a very living musical experience. So yes, that is really special, and I think different places have, I think the appeal of this place that I do this jazz hang thing, the Soapbox Gallery, is that there's something sort of special about that instrument in that space. So yeah, that's very important.
Okay, well, what was your last visited concert you went to just for fun?
The last concert I went to just for fun was going to hear, I went twice right before I left New York. Oh yeah, the last one I guess was Gerald Clayton at the Village Vanguard. So it was Gerald Clayton, Joe Sanders, Marcus Gilmore, Logan Richardson, and Marquise Hill. It was Gerald Clayton. So Gerald Clayton is a tremendous pianist originally from the West Coast. He lived in New York for a while, and now I think he's back in LA. But he's one of my favorites. So yes, that was the last concert I went to.
And how was it?
Very good. Very good. It was, yeah, I liked it a lot.
Okay. Well, last question. How do you listen to music? Do you have big speakers in your house? When you are traveling, do you have a phone and headphones, or how is this working for you?
You know, it's funny, I go through periods where I'm listening more and I'm listening less. I would say in the last 3 or 4 years, I've definitely been listening less. I'll go out and hear things in New York, but I don't listen as much in my home as I used to. I do have a pretty nice situation. I mean, and I've recently improved it. I inherited a Macintosh receiver, which is a very nice old receiver. It's not tube, but it's a solid state one, but a really good one. And that really improved the sound in my house. I have a turntable and I listen to records. So lately I've been doing that more. On the road, I listen to, I mean, a lot of times, you know, it's just sort of dependent on what's happening. I'll sometimes listen through, whatever, on head earbuds, you know, and all that kind of stuff, because it's convenient. But I'm a little bit in a less listening phase right now. I remember I had a friend that used to play, a very good bass player, and he, okay. Anyway, I asked him what he was listening to, and he's like, I have 3 records, and 2 of them are Bill Evans trio records. I was like, oh, you're really into Bill Evans? He said, not really. So I was like, he had 3 records they listened to. So I think sometimes people go through these phases where they're not listening as much, and I've been in a bit of one myself. So, but I'm hoping to emerge from it and listen to more.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. And good luck with everything.
You too, and thank you for doing this.
Thank
you for all your support. Beautiful. Do I get up?
Well, we made it.
Yes, very good.